The Kinoplenka OCG is one of the oldest and most violent gangs in Tatarstan. The group appeared around the beginning of the 1980s. In Kazan, it territorially covered Kulakmetov Street, Okolnaya Street, Bakalenaya Street, and Vostania Street. The OCG got its name because of the neighboring film factory, Tasma. Like other groups, the Kinofilm was small at first and munty. It numbered only a few dozen people who were united by sports sections. The beginning. The first leaders of the Kinofilm OCG were certain Traktor, Akhmet, and Shakir. But not much was known about that period of the group, as its representatives tried not to show themselves in any way, occasionally only appearing in fights. Around 83 to 84, the group already announced itself and had about 50 fighters. At that time, the film strip began to come to the attention of the police because it was at that time that teenagers in Kazan began to divide the asphalt, to fight with each other and occupy certain territories. Now, instead of sports clubs, teenagers needed only fights, which they did with success. The groupers of Kinofilm began to fight with representatives of the nearest youth gangs, Dirt, Zhilka, and Kettles. And these were not ordinary fights, as different weapons were actively used: knives, metal balls, and armature. After such clashes, many people were hospitalized. Representatives of Kinofilm quite often came out of the skirmishes winners. In addition to street glory, it brought a lot of problems. Many sat down, someone was killed. In 1987, there was a mass brawl among the groupers, and in 1987, about 500 people fought wall-to-wall in Verkhny Uslon. At that time, more than a dozen so-called old men from Kinofilm found themselves in the dock. As a result, the group lost respect and its strength because the leaders were under investigation. They actively testified against their neighbors to protect themselves. Further fate. At that time, there was complete uncertainty in the group. The criminal mastermind İlfeti, Elfat Sungatulin, came to power. He preferred business rather than fights and showdowns. By the way, it was in these times that a group of people separated from Kinofilm and organized their own gang, Mozbrigada. The group Nizi took away from the film market, but Kinofilm itself did not hold on to the market, as the era of protection of cooperators, budding merchants, was beginning. In addition, the manufacture of illegal audio cassettes and alcoholic beverages actively flourished in the group's territory. The groupers of Kinofilm could not become businessmen. Irek Mingazizov really breathed new life into the gang in 1989. Irek had previously participated in mass brawls, but instead of prison, he preferred to run away to serve in the army. He served in Central Asia, which was the reason for his nickname, Tashkent. Returning to Kazan after his service, Mingazizov gathered people around him and planned to become the leader of the group. That's when a split occurred among the representatives of Kinofilm. People who wanted money, who didn't want warriors, followed İlfeti into business. Those who wanted blood, fights, and preservation of traditions followed Tashkent. There was no division as such, just the young followed Tashkent, and the older ones who wanted to do business followed İlfeti. Nevertheless, these internal groups were in conflict with each other. The situation was always heated. In 1993, when Irek Mingazizov's birthday celebration was taking place, there was a conflict between Tashkent and İlfetiev. There was a scuffle, which led to the enmity moving to the next level. Now the gangs began to gather on their own. The war between the other gangs, Zhilka and Sevastopol, also added fuel to the fire. Tashkent favored the Zhilka gangs, as they were also adherents of the Blat concepts, but İlfeti joined the Sevastopol gang. The head of Zhilka, Haidar, himself offered Tashkent to join him. Soon there were clashes between the gangs which turned into a war between İlfeti and Tashkent. In 1994, it was believed that Ilfati's crony, Krylie, was setting the young members of Kinofilm against the Tashkent members. They hired two hitmen, Vasya and Bychok, who shot Krylie with 2 TTs in the evening near his house. The reason for his murder was also to intimidate another Ilfati authority figure, Afonya. The second to be killed was Kemba, Vadim Sergeyev. He was an authority among those gang members who had not yet made up their minds. He was also a recruiter for Ilfati's group. To top it all off, Kembu had a personal dislike for the Tashkent gang, in particular a certain Yusik. In 1984, he, Yusik, and 5 other members of Kinofilm were sentenced to different terms under the article gang rape. Later it turned out that Yusik had falsified Sergeyev. The latter was later acquitted. The Tashkent killers came to Kembo's house and waited. He arrived in a car, got out of it, and they immediately started shooting at him. Being wounded, Sergeyev ran down the street but fell down. They caught up with him and fired control shots. Kembu was still alive when the police arrived, but later died. In addition to the internecine wars, the Kinoplenkovs also liquidated the Sevastopol and Zhizhkovsky. Tashkent hated the merchants and believed that if they were a source of income for competitors, they should be eliminated. After a while, the Tashkent ones also began to get a response. The killers, Bychok and Azatay, were on their way to a training camp in 1995. On one of the streets, their car was shot at. During this assassination attempt, a policeman was also wounded. Azatay died and Bychok escaped. The war between the Kinofilm factions moved to St. Petersburg and Moscow. In 1995, Tarakan, one of Ilfati's lookouts in Moscow, was killed. It is believed to have been revenge for Azatay's murder. Tarakan was shot in his own office. Among the killers was Bychok, who was recognized in 1995. Roman Makarov, one of Tashkent's own, was killed. And in 1996, Yusik and his guards were attacked. He was considered the chief financier in the Tashkent gang. All were killed. After that, Tashkent left Kazan for St. Petersburg for safety. Tashkents were joined by Arnold and Zorik, 2 of Tatarstan's most notorious hitmen. Arnold, according to the police, is involved in more than a dozen murders. Many of his orders were carried out by his own hand. After a while, the maintenance of regular hitmen became overhead, and they decided to get rid of Zorik and Arnold. In 1999, they left for training camp and went missing. And in 1996, Bychok and Arnold caught the tongue, a guy nicknamed Kuyan from the group Nizi. Trying to find out where his leaders were, they tortured him and then shot him dead. The most notorious crime of the Tashkent group was the elimination of Sapog from the Niz group. In 1996, he and 5 other members of the Nizi organized crime group were shot in a cafe. Most of them died on the spot. Sapog survived because he was late for the meeting. When he arrived, he found only corpses. The liquidation of the gang by the Internal Affairs authorities began only in 2007. At the end of their criminal activities, the Ilfatievs tried to legalize themselves as much as possible. For example, Ilfati himself had a chain of stores. Afonya had a store selling refrigerators. The old methods of making money were no longer in question. The last major showdown can be considered 2005. Then Adelchik was killed, the leader of the young among the Kinoplenkovskys. He took under his leadership the Commonwealth and pushed the old men away from the management. As a result, he was killed. In the period 2000-2010, the bandits of Kinofilm were arrested and sentenced to various terms. By this time, the group was gone. What is interesting, the arrest of the former leader of the group occurred quite recently, in 2023.